We all know that wealth trumps everything. But I want to talk about sexual liberation, because I think that it's disappeared from the lingo, and I want to introduce what I think it may be. Now, of course, we all have a sort of thumbnail sketch of what it means, which is, you know, do whatever you like with whomever you choose, as frequently or infrequently as you like. And while I'm all for it, absolutely, go for it, do what you can, that is not the same thing. It's not reducible to what individuals do, mostly because much of our lives are constrained by much more than our individual choices. And here's how I approach the question in the book. What would sexual liberation mean? We can perhaps agree on what must disappear: institutional and legal discrimination against LGBT people, fixed gender roles and sexual identities, legal constraints on consensual sex, and social repression of sexual experimentation, etc. While many of us dream of a world in which we are free to do as we choose with our bodies and sex lives, living under capitalism where sex is bought and sold, bodies objectified, and relationships constrained by material forces out of our control, it seems that even our fantasies must be limited somewhat by the world in which we live. The ubiquitous use of sexual images to sell everything from beer to toothpaste, and shifts in popular culture that have normalized skimpy clothing and near nudity, exist alongside a culture of sexual repression and a formal educational policy of denying crucial sexual knowledge to youth. Sex education in the United States in the early 21st century has been reduced to puritanical, abstinence-only lectures, denying young people knowledge about the most intimate functions of their bodies, including how to use a condom in the age of AIDS. And I move on to talk about this. LGBT people can rarely glimpse images of people like themselves on the screen. Even lesbian porn is largely the domain of some straight men's fantasies, complete with spiked heels, cosmetically enlarged breasts, and women touching each other with long, sharp nails in ways very few women would ever find physically gratifying. You need to understand that. You can ask me afterwards. Perhaps the virtual media blackout on LGBT sex has its upside, since the images of straight sex on the screen are overwhelmingly dominated by conventionally good-looking and unimaginably toned young people who always appear to know exactly how to touch each other from the first moments, and who invariably climax simultaneously, beating the statistical odds on such events. This constant bombardment of unreal sexual images and cosmetically altered or chiseled gym bodies not only promotes phony models of sex, but stokes feelings of sexual inadequacy and contributes to negative body images. From the Kinsey reports of the late 1940s and early 1950s on men's and women's sexual behavior, to the Height Report studies on men's and women's sexuality in the 1970s, medical and social scientists have researched sexual practices and pleasures. The conclusion drawn by Sherry Height, who studies psychosexual behavior and has done extensive research on sex practices and attitudes, is we haven't had a sexual revolution yet, but we need one. So, what I mean by that is simply this. It is inconceivable to separate out the question of sexual liberation from the larger questions of the world in which we live. Because if you just think about it, it's not simply about sort of like get over your, you know, sort of repressive notions of this or that, or, you know, get out there and try something new. The realities of our lives, for most people, you gotta get up in the morning. If you have kids, you gotta get the kids ready for school, get them ready for childcare. You gotta get yourself ready to go to work, if you're lucky, or school, or both, most likely. Then you gotta go sit in a hellacious commute for much too long, or you get in a subway where somebody's elbow is up your nose. And then you gotta go sit in a place for 8 or 10 or 12 hours or more that you don't want to be at, that you're treated like crap at, if you're lucky, in which case you're still looking for a job if you're not lucky, and then you're worried about whether or not you can make the car payments, if you're gonna have health care, if you put the kids through school. Then you gotta turn around, you gotta get back in the hellacious commute, you gotta go get the kids if you got kids, you gotta go cook, you gotta clean, you gotta do all the rest of this crap. This is not conducive to sexual experimentation. This is conducive to exhaustion. Our lives are exhausting and burdened with garbage because we live in a world in which profit reigns supreme, in which we do not have mass transit systems that are real and functional and accessible, in which we do not have proper child care that is accessible and affordable, in which we do not have decent jobs or any jobs in many places, in which all of these other real material aspects of our lives grind us down and prevent us from leading the kind of liberatory existences that many of us would love. So you cannot separate out the question of not just LGBT rights, but LGBT liberation, or anyone's sexual liberation. Because let's face it, there may be special oppression of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, but in our society, everybody is sexually repressed. It's a fact. None of us are able to really express ourselves fully because we lead lives under a cloud, under constraints that are not of our own making and of our own doing. And that's, it's one of the reasons I connect this struggle, so these ideas so much to struggle and to organizing. And it's one of the main reasons I got so involved in the march and continuing to be involved in the national network that's come out of the march called Equality Across America, which is an attempt to basically build an alternative to the sort of establishment organizations that are dead set on lobbying and sitting at the table and going into back rooms and going hat in hand and pleading with powerful people, can you please give us a crumb? We say, screw the crumbs, we're done with crumbs, we want it all.